As you observe Bruce Lee's legendary footage, I will commence introducing you to this extraordinary occurrence that transpired in the heart of American industry. Please view the presentation patiently until completion. Bruce Lee measured 145 pounds. He walked into that Detroit auto plant alone on a frigid March evening. No security clearance, no official invitation, no recognition from the men whose hands built America's cars. 47 union workers were inside the River Rouge Complex that night. Most of them thought they were about to watch some Hollywood actor get embarrassed by real working men. What they genuinely witnessed for 8 minutes modified something in their comprehension of what strength genuinely signified. This is what they perceived. Detroit, Michigan. March 1968. Not the Detroit of automobile advertisements, and not the chrome and assembly line photographs the corporations distributed to shareholders. This was the actual Detroit, the one that existed after the final whistle sounded, in facilities where men consumed their adult existences, constructing things with their hands, in chambers where physical power was the only currency that mattered, and reputation was earned through steel and sweat, not words. The atmosphere that evening transported the particular frigidity of a Great Lakes industrial winter, sharp, penetrating. The classification of frigid that discovers its method through work coats and coveralls, that settles in bones and joints, that makes every movement a negotiation with discomfort. The Ford River Rouge Complex was the largest integrated factory in the world. 1,000 buildings across 2,000 acres. Its own steel mill, its own power plant, its own railroad. 90,000 workers during peak production. This was not a facility. This was a city devoted to a single purpose, the transformation of raw materials into the machines that moved America. On this particular March evening, the night shift had just concluded. Third shift, midnight to 8 a.m. The men who labored when the world slept, who maintained the machinery, who kept the assembly lines operational while executives slumbered in suburban residences miles from the factory floor. The 47 men had remained after the final whistle, not officially. There were no official gatherings in the Rouge after hours, but the Plant 3 assembly floor possessed sufficient space, and the foreman, a man named Wilson, who'd been with Ford for 23 years, had looked the other way when Marcus O'Brien requested to utilize the floor for something. Marcus Steele O'Brien was 36 years of age, and he was a legend inside the Rouge. Not because of his production numbers, though those were exceptional. Not because of his years of service, though he'd been there since returning from Korea in 1953. He was a legend because of what he represented to men who measured their value in physical capability. 6 feet 3 inches in elevation, 270 pounds in mass. These numbers require comprehension, not because substantial men are uncommon in automotive manufacturing. They are not. But because O'Brien's magnitude was accompanied by something additional. And he had been a Marine, not simply a Marine, a sergeant in the 1st Marine Division, Korea, 1952 to 1953, Chosin Reservoir, Incheon, places where men discovered what they were constructed of when everything else was stripped away. He'd returned with a Navy Cross for valor and hands that comprehended exactly how much force a human body could generate, and exactly how much force a human body could withstand. In 15 years at the Rouge, he had never been challenged successfully, and not in the parking lot, disputes that occasionally erupted between shifts, not in the union hall when negotiations became physical, not in the informal competitions that auto workers engaged in to establish hierarchy, arm wrestling, lifting competitions, the occasional after-hours boxing in the plant gymnasium. Marcus Steele O'Brien was the undisputed authority on what strength signified in a world where strength was the measure of a man. Where his hands were the magnitude of catcher's mitts from years of operating machinery and lifting steel. His forearms were the circumference most men's upper legs achieved. His shoulders had been constructed by 15 years of manual labor that would have broken smaller men within months. His neck was a column of muscle and scar tissue from Korea and from the plant, from the method industrial labor inscribes itself into a body over decades. Men at the Rouge possessed a designation for him. Nay, they designated him the Forge, because encountering Marcus O'Brien in any form of physical confrontation, according to men who had attempted it, felt less like engaging a human being and more like attempting to move industrial equipment. There was no yield, no flexibility, no point where pressure produced result. Now he absorbed impacts that would have terminated other men and responded not with anger, but with something more unsettling. The calm of someone who comprehends they cannot be genuinely injured by what you're capable of delivering. The story of how Bruce Lee concluded up inside the River Rouge Complex on a March evening in 1968 commences, as many significant occurrences do, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a conversation that nobody anticipated would lead anywhere. It was 2 weeks earlier, a community center in Dearborn, the classification of location that served the automotive workers and their families, that existed in the gaps between the plant and home, between labor and rest. Bruce was there conducting a public demonstration, not a commercial occurrence, a community service. The center's director had requested him after perceiving him on the Green Hornet television program, which had been terminated after a single season, but had generated sufficient interest that people recognized the small Asian man who portrayed Kato. 60 individuals attended, mostly families, some teenagers, a few curious adults who'd perceived the show and desired to witness if the television choreography possessed any basis in genuine technique. Bruce conducted the demonstration the method he always did, not performing, educating, explaining principles, demonstrating efficiency. He's showing how a body in motion could become something that conventional defensive thinking possessed no framework for processing. In the rear of the community center, gymnasium stood 3 men in work clothes, auto workers from the Rouge who'd arrived together, who stood with the particular posture of men who'd consumed their adult existences in physical labor, weight distributed, shoulders back, hands that never fully relaxed, even when at rest. One of them was Marcus O'Brien's younger brother, a Patrick, 31 years of age, also a Rouge worker, also substantial, though not his brother's magnitude. Patrick observed Bruce execute a demonstration with a volunteer from the audience, a man perhaps 190 pounds who attempted to grab Bruce and discovered himself, 3 seconds later, on the gymnasium floor, with no clear understanding of the transition between standing and horizontal. Patrick turned to his companions. Marcus needs to perceive this, his companions agreed, and not because they accepted Bruce was superior to Marcus. That was inconceivable. Marcus was the standard against which physical capability was measured, but because this was sufficiently unusual, sufficiently outside their normal framework, that Marcus would desire to comprehend about it. The following day, Patrick approached his brother during the lunch interval at the plant. He described what he'd perceived. Bruce Lee, 5'7", maybe 145 pounds. Moving in methods that made men twice his magnitude resemble, they were navigating through water. Marcus listened the method he always listened, completely, without interruption, processing intelligence before responding. Television nonsense, he concluded finally. Camera angles, cooperative volunteers, Hollywood. I considered that, Patrick responded. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was the Dearborn Community Center. The volunteer was Jerry Anderson from Plant 2. You comprehend, Jerry. In 200 pounds. Played football at Cass Tech, not someone who takes a dive. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, not because he accepted his brother, but because his brother was not given to exaggeration, and Jerry Anderson was indeed not someone who would participate in theatrical deception. So what are you articulating? I'm articulating you should perceive it yourself. Decide if it's genuine. Marcus considered this. He had no particular interest in martial arts. His comprehension of combat was straightforward. Size, power, experience. He'd validated this comprehension in Korea and in 15 years at the Rouge. But he also possessed curiosity. The classification of curiosity that comes from confidence. He wasn't threatened by the possibility that someone possessed skills he didn't comprehend. He simply desired to observe, evaluate, determine if there was anything worth learning. Can you arrange it? Marcus inquired. I can attempt. What Patrick arranged, through connections and conversations that moved through the Dearborn community, like current through copper wire, was this. Bruce Lee would come to the Rouge, after hours, conduct a private demonstration for interested workers. No payment, no publicity, no official Ford involvement. Simply a teacher presenting to students who happened to labor in an automotive facility. Bruce accepted, not because of the venue, because the request had been respectful, and because the workers genuinely desired to learn, because Bruce comprehended that authentic martial arts belonged not in studios with polished floors and mirrors, but in locations where genuine people existed, genuine existences, and desired practical knowledge they could utilize. March 15th, 1968. 8:47 p.m. The night shift had just concluded. Most workers had departed, but 47 men had remained, some because Patrick had communicated to them about the demonstration, then others because word had circulated through the plant. The method information always circulated in industrial facilities, through informal networks that moved faster than any official communication. They assembled on the plant. 3 assembly floor, a space perhaps 60 feet by 40 feet, currently vacant, the assembly line immobile and silent. The overhead industrial lights created harsh illumination. The concrete floor was stained with decades of oil and metal shavings. The atmosphere smelled of grease and steel and the particular scent of a facility that never completely terminates operating, even when the machinery halts. Marcus stood near the rear wall, arms folded across his chest. He'd arrived early, desired to observe from a position where he could perceive everything. The other 46 workers had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, some sitting on equipment crates, others standing with the patience of men accustomed to waiting. The Bruce arrived at 9:02 p.m., guided by Patrick through the facility's labyrinth of corridors and stairwells. He was clothed in dark trousers and a navy pullover shirt. Simple, functional. He transported a small canvas bag that contained, Patrick would later learn, only a modification of clothing and a towel. When Bruce entered the assembly floor, the conversation among the workers diminished, but didn't terminate completely. This was their territory, their facility. Now, they weren't going to modify their behavior for a visitor, regardless of who that visitor might be. Bruce didn't appear to notice or care. He positioned his bag against the wall, removed his pullover to reveal a black fitted shirt underneath, and navigated to the center of the cleared space. The workers observed. The initial assessment was universal and automatic. Small. Excessively small. perhaps 145 pounds, compact frame, and narrow shoulders relative to men who'd consumed years developing the upper body strength required for industrial labor. No visible scars, no cauliflower ears, no broken knuckles, none of the physical markers that auto workers recognized as evidence of someone who'd been in genuine physical confrontations. He resembled, one worker later recounted, like somebody's younger brother who'd wandered into the incorrect location. Marcus, from his position near the rear wall, inexperienced the identical assessment, added his own evaluation. This was the man Patrick had been so impressed by? This was supposed to demonstrate something about combat that Marcus didn't already comprehend? The skepticism wasn't hostile. It was simply the automatic calculation of men who'd learned to read physical capability the method engineers read blueprints. Bruce stood in the center of the floor and waited until the workers' conversation naturally concluded. Then he articulated, with his vocal projection clear but not elevated, carrying across the assembly floor through projection rather than volume. Thank you for permitting me to be here tonight. I comprehend you've remained after your shift. I appreciate your temporal investment. His English transported a slight accent, Cantonese influenced but completely comprehensible. His demeanor was neither deferential nor arrogant, simply present. I'm not here to perform. I'm here to demonstrate principles. If you perceive something valuable, you're welcome to inquire questions. If you don't, you've only lost an hour, and you can return to whatever you'd have been executing otherwise. Straightforward, no theatrical presentation, no attempting to impress. The workers appreciated this. They possessed no tolerance for nonsense, for salesmanship, for anyone attempting to convince them of something through words rather than demonstration. I'll need a volunteer, Bruce continued. Someone willing to attempt to grab me, restrain me, utilizing whatever method feels natural. I'll demonstrate some principles of redirection and control. Nobody moved initially, not because they were afraid, but because volunteering meant being the first to potentially resemble foolish if this turned out to be theatrical nonsense. Then a man near the front stood up. Big man, perhaps 230 pounds. Name was Frank Kowalski. Worked the stamping press. Hands like sledgehammers from years of handling industrial equipment. I'll go, Frank articulated. Bruce nodded. Approach me however you desire. Attempt to grab, to restrain. Whatever feels correct to you. Frank walked forward. He wasn't attempting to be aggressive, but he also wasn't going to be gentle. He was going to treat this like a genuine attempt, because that was the only method to determine if what Bruce was claiming possessed validity. Now he reached for Bruce's shoulders, the standard beginning of a grappling engagement. The method auto workers settled disputes. The method's strength typically dominated. His hands closed on empty space. Not because Bruce had jumped backward, not because he'd evaded dramatically, because he'd displaced subtly, his body angled perhaps 15 degrees, and Frank's reaching hands discovered nothing where Bruce's shoulders had been a fraction of a second earlier. Frank reset. Attempted again. Same result. On the third attempt, Frank committed completely, lunged forward, both hands reaching, determined to establish contact. Bruce moved inside the reach, counterintuitive, closer not farther, and Frank's extended arms passed on either side of Bruce's body. Bruce's hands touched Frank's wrists. Light contact, redirected the momentum, guided it, and Frank, all 230 pounds of stamping press operator, discovered himself rotating, his balance vanished, and his feet attempting to locate purchase on the oil-stained concrete, his upper body turning against his volition. He didn't fall. Bruce had controlled the descent, but Frank concluded up bent forward, off balance, with Bruce positioned behind him, one hand light on Frank's shoulder. "This is the principle," Bruce articulated, stepping back. "I didn't oppose your force. I joined it, redirected it, utilized your momentum against your structure." Frank straightened up, where his facial expression was the expression of someone attempting to process an experience that didn't align with existing comprehension. "How did—" He paused. "What did you execute?" "Physics. When you extended your arms, you created vulnerability in your center. I simply moved to where the vulnerability was." The assembly floor was quiet now, all 47 workers observing. This wasn't theatrical. Frank was genuine. His confusion was genuine. Something had transpired that existed outside their conventional framework for physical confrontation. Bruce conducted similar demonstrations with 3 more volunteers over the next 20 minutes. Each concluded the same method, the worker attempting to utilize size and strength, discovering those advantages neutralized by movement and positioning they couldn't track or counter. Marcus observed everything from his position near the rear wall. His expression hadn't modified. But something behind his vision had displaced. This wasn't camera angles. This wasn't cooperative volunteers. This was Frank Kowalski, who Marcus had perceived win fights in the plant parking lot, being manipulated like a juvenile. After the 4th demonstration, Marcus pushed off from the wall and walked forward. The workers noticed immediately. Conversation halted. Everyone comprehended what this signified. Marcus Steele. O'Brien didn't walk onto the floor unless he intended to participate. And when Marcus participated, the dynamics of any physical exchange modified completely. He stopped approximately 8 feet from Bruce, looked down at him from his substantial elevation. Bruce looked upward. His expression didn't modify. No alteration for the magnitude differential. No visible calculation of whether this was a genuine challenge or simply another volunteer. "Mr. O'Brien," Patrick articulated from the side, his vocal projection containing a note of concern. "This is just a demonstration." Marcus raised a hand slightly. Patrick went quiet. "I'm not here to cause difficulty," Marcus articulated. His vocal projection was calm, deliberate. "I desire to comprehend if what you're demonstrating functions against someone who comprehends how to utilize their magnitude correctly." Bruce studied him for a moment. "You possess military experience." Not a question, a statement. Marcus's eyebrows elevated slightly. "How did you— the method you distribute your mass, the method you position your feet, you've been instructed how to fight, not just how to brawl." "Marine Corps, Korea, 15 years ago." Bruce nodded. "Subsequently, you comprehend genuine combat, not exhibition, not demonstration. Genuine." "I comprehend it." "And you desire to test if these principles function against genuine application of force." "That's what I desire to comprehend." Bruce was quiet for a long moment. The assembly floor waited. Then he nodded. "Approach me the method you would approach any genuine threat. Utilize your training. Utilize your magnitude. Attempt to control me, restrain me, conclude the confrontation. I'll demonstrate why magnitude alone possesses limitations." Marcus removed his work jacket, folded it meticulously, positioned it on a nearby crate. Underneath, a flannel shirt stretched across shoulders, constructed by a decade and a half of industrial labor. He rotated his neck, audible articulation sounds in the quiet assembly floor. This wasn't performance. This was preparation, the ritual before genuine engagement. The 46 other workers had drawn back slightly, forming a wider circle. Nobody was speaking. The magnitude of what was about to transpire was apparent to everyone. Marcus Steele O'Brien, The undisputed measure of strength at the Rouge, was about to test himself against this small martial arts instructor. And everyone in that assembly floor comprehended that what transpired in the next few minutes would become part of plant legend, recounted in break rooms and parking lots for years. Marcus approached slowly, not rushing, his marine training evident in every movement. Weight low, base stable, hands positioned to defend and attack. He wasn't going to grab wildly like the previous volunteers. He was going to close distance methodically, establish superior position, utilize his 125-pound advantage to impose his volition. 7 feet between them. 6 feet. Marcus feinted with his left hand, testing reaction, reading speed. Bruce's head moved slightly, 2 inches, and just sufficient to track the feint without committing to a response. Marcus processed this. Fast. The small man was extremely fast. 5 feet, 4 feet. Marcus committed. Not a wild lunge. A controlled advance combined with both hands reaching for a clinch position. The method Marines were instructed to close with an enemy. The method that utilized size and strength maximally. Bruce moved. Not backward. Not to the side in any predictable direction. He moved in a method that Marcus's extensive combat experience possessed no category for. Bruce descended, his entire body dropping perhaps 6 inches, while simultaneously displacing forward and at an angle. Marcus's hands, positioned to close on shoulders and upper torso, discovered nothing. Bruce was beneath the reach, inside the guard, closer than any opponent had ever been this rapidly. Bruce's hands touched Marcus's lead arm, light contact at the wrist and elbow. And Marcus, 270 pounds of muscle and military training and 15 years of industrial labor, discovered his arm being redirected, his balance compromised, his forward momentum transformed into something that was operating against him rather than for him. He didn't go down. His base was excessively solid, his experience excessively extensive. But for precisely 2 seconds, Marcus Steele O'Brien was off balance, and every worker on that assembly floor could perceive it. Bruce stepped back, returned to neutral position. Marcus recovered, reset. His facial expression had modified. Not anger, reassessment. Again, Marcus articulated. They engaged 4 more occasions over the next 8 minutes. Marcus attempted different approaches. Grappling, striking, combinations drawn from military combatives training. Each occasion concluded similarly, not with Marcus being dominated or injured, but with Marcus discovering his advantages, neutralized by movement and positioning, he couldn't counter. On the 5th engagement, Marcus managed to establish a grip on Bruce's shoulder. Finally, contact, control. He commenced to utilize his strength, to pull, to manipulate, to demonstrate that once superior size established contact, the physics modified. Bruce's response was to join the pull, not resist it, move with it, accelerate it beyond what Marcus anticipated. Marcus's own force, that amplified by Bruce's acceleration, pulled him forward faster than his feet could adjust. His balance vanished. His grip, dependent on structure, collapsed, and Bruce was behind him, one hand light on Marcus's shoulder, perfectly positioned. Marcus stood there for a long moment, breathing deliberately, processing. Then he turned around, extended his hand. "I've been in genuine combat," Marcus articulated. "Korea, the Rouge. I comprehend what functions and what doesn't. What you just demonstrated, that functions, that's not theatrical, that's genuine." Bruce shook his hand. "Your strength is exceptional. Your training is evident. But strength requires structure. Disrupt the structure, strength becomes irrelevant." Marcus nodded gradually. Something fundamental had displaced in his comprehension. For 15 years, he'd been the measure of what physical power signified at the Rouge. In 8 minutes, a man half his magnitude had demonstrated that his entire framework possessed gaps he'd never considered. "Could you teach this?" Marcus inquired. "To someone my magnitude? Someone who already possesses strength but desires to comprehend this?" He gestured, searching for words. "This efficiency you're demonstrating." Bruce considered this. Size isn't a disadvantage if you comprehend how to utilize it correctly. The problem isn't that you're substantial. The problem is that you've learned to rely on size when technique would be more effective. Subsequently, teach me the technique. What commenced that evening in the River Rouge assembly floor became something unprecedented in Detroit's automotive industry. For the next 11 months, March 1968 to February 1969, Bruce Lee returned to the Rouge twice monthly. Not publicly. No Ford involvement. No official acknowledgement. In simply a teacher and students who happened to labor at the world's largest integrated factory. Marcus became Bruce's most dedicated student among the auto workers, not because he desired to defeat Bruce. He'd concluded attempting that after the initial evening, but because he recognized in Bruce's principles something that aligned with his own values: efficiency, functionality, elimination of waste. The same principles that made Ford assembly lines revolutionary applied to combat. In the economy of motion, elimination of unnecessary movement, functionality over aesthetics. The 47 workers who witnessed that initial demonstration became a core group. They instructed during lunch intervals, after shifts in the plant gymnasium. They disseminated what they learned to other workers, not as mysticism, not as exotic martial arts, but as practical principles that made sense to men who comprehended machinery and physics. By 1969, and there were over 200 Rouge workers who'd been exposed to principles that traced directly back to that March evening when Bruce Lee demonstrated that magnitude alone didn't determine outcomes. Marcus never spoke publicly about Bruce Lee. Auto workers don't discuss things externally that transpire internally, but men who labored beside him noticed modifications, a different method of moving, a different approach to the occasional disputes that arose in any facility employing tens of thousands of individuals. He never fought again at the Rouge after that evening. Didn't need to. His reputation was secure, and more significantly, he'd learned something more valuable than dominance through force. Bruce returned to his films, his students, his philosophy. The Rouge was simply another location where he planted seeds, ideas that would grow in soil most martial artists never touched. In blue-collar Detroit, assembly line workers, men who measured value through what their hands could construct and what their bodies could withstand. The plant. 3 assembly floor still exists, still operates. No marker, no plaque, nothing indicating what transpired there on a frigid March evening in 1968. But what happened within that space, between harsh industrial lights and oil-stained concrete, witnessed by 47 auto workers who'd remained after their shift concluded, left something behind that steel and machinery weren't designed to retain. The memory of what transpires when industrial strength encounters functional efficiency. When size learns, it possesses been relying on advantages that can be neutralized by someone who comprehends the genuine physics of human movement. Now that is what 47 workers transported home to Dearborn and Highland Park and the neighborhoods surrounding the Rouge. That is what Marcus Steele O'Brien learned in 8 minutes and consumed 11 months attempting to comprehend. That is what Bruce Lee left behind in the heart of American industry. The recognition that genuine strength isn't magnitude, it's comprehension.